dolphins. They're supposed to be highly intelligent.
I'm Lee Cowan. Please join us when our trumpet sounds again next Sunday morning. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'm Ed O'Keefe in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, as the legal troubles for former President Trump and some of his key allies mount, his grip on the Republican Party tightens, leading up to the midterm elections. In the newest installment of this late summer drama, the judge authorized that search warrant giving the FBI permission to seize classified materials from Mr. Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago now says he's inclined to make public some of the information in the affidavit justifying it. Despite the Justice Department's objection to releasing any of it, they're working on redactions. We'll talk with the top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Turner. He's one of many lawmakers who want to know more about those documents. Then we'll try to decipher the legal challenges in at least 13 federal, state, and congressional investigations and lawsuits involving the former president. And it's back to school time. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona will talk about the challenges facing our nation's school children, including teacher shortages across the country and learning setbacks due to COVID. Plus, former White House coronavirus response coordinator Dr. Deborah Birx returns to weigh in on the proposed changes at the CDC. Moving on to the midterm elections, as President Biden signs that bill that fights climate change, cuts health care costs, and raises taxes on corporations, Democrats hope to run with that victory towards the finish line in November.
We've not wavered, we've not flinched, and we've not given in. Instead, we're delivering results for the American people.
Will voters see it that way? Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has a reality check.
There's probably a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. Senate races are just different. They're statewide. Candidate quality has a lot to do with the outcome.
We'll take a look at why he's saying that with our political panel. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. I'm Ed O'Keefe. We'll see Margaret in a moment, but I'm helping her out today as she's dealing with a situation that's all too familiar for every parent: caring for a sick child. On this late summer morning, Americans are looking ahead to the fall. Kids are going back to school, and the politics leading into the midterm elections are heating up. We'll get to that in a moment, but we begin with Margaret's interview with Education Secretary Miguel Cardona. She spoke to him earlier.
Good morning to you, Mr. Secretary.
Good morning.
This is a busy time of year for you, no doubt. President Biden said America's students are on average 2 to 4 months behind in reading and in math because of the pandemic. Now we also have this teacher shortage, and in some states like Missouri, a number of districts are shortening the school week to just 4 days. How much additional learning loss will happen because of the shortage?
First of all, I'm excited about the beginning of the school year. This is a year full of promise and opportunities for students who have, for the last 2 years, put up with too much. And thanks to the American Rescue Plan, the dollars are there to make sure that we can open up our schools with sufficient educators. Our students need more, not less. So when I hear reports of districts shortening up their week, it concerns me. Our students need additional support. They need smaller class sizes. They need tutors. They need after-school programs. So let's use the American Rescue Plan dollars to bring back retired teachers, to work with universities to make sure that our student teachers are starting a little bit earlier into their profession, using the dollars that were put forward by the federal government. We think it's important that our students get more this year, not less.
Exactly. That's what I said to my investigator that has a master's degree in teaching that taught up in New York before he become an investigator, that how come he can't go to some of these schools around here and get a substitute temporary job in teaching. Because to me, a teacher is a calling. Number one, to me, a teacher is similar towards being a minister. towards wanting to unveil that in which what needs to be unveiled. If you're not unveiling it in scripture form, you're unveiling it in history form or learning form. And of course, we must ask the question, how come there is a shortage of teachers this year? Well, do you think maybe because our system can't protect them towards some idiot going into a schoolhouse and go to freaking picking off people like they done down in Texas this past ending of the season, this past spring? Do you think maybe it have something to do with all the lawsuits that teachers now are liable for, towards like down in Florida, and if they don't teach the LGBTQ community just right, they can actually wind up in front of a judge and being sued? This is all unpragmatic pertaining to what we need to do as a nation in facing the nation. This particular session today may very well be one of the most important, valued sessions that Face the Nation can put out and has put out all year long. Please listen to this, because our future is at stake. Our children's future is at stake. How we conduct ourselves is at stake. It's not only a shortage of teachers, but there's a shortage of police officers. There's been so many police officers that has resigned or quit or whatever down in New Orleans. They're actually thinking about canceling the Mardi Gras coming up this spring. In which, as far as I'm concerned, it needs to be canceled, because I don't go along with that type of activity. I think it's very, very immoral. I think it's very, very ungodly for the most part, not all of it, but for the most part. And I think it's disorderly, just like I think the festival that they have down at Key West, Florida, every fall along about Halloween. I think that should be called off or canceled, pertaining to the LGBTQ community that wants to get out there and strip off all their clothes and act like that they got painted on bathing suits, but basically they're walking around stripped off bare naked. That festival, if I'm not mistaken, lasts for about a whole weekend, 4 or 5 days, and boy, do they ever come out of the woodwork in being proud of who they are. Well, it's one thing for you to be proud of who you are, and you do it on your side of the street. But whenever you start coming over here on my side of the street, and you start influencing my family and enticing my children of becoming the same thing that you are, then is whenever we have a problem. And the problem isn't so much of what that they're doing. The problem is the fact of what the true Christian society is not doing by calling their hand. And whenever these great sorrows fall upon to our nation, they're not falling upon to our nation because God is rewarding us because of us being a godly nation, but God is penalizing us because of us not being a godly nation. So whenever we see harsh, intense events, regardless whether it comes in the form of fires or floods, tornadoes or hurricanes or earthquakes or meteor showers, pertaining to solar flares and etc., whenever we see these hard events hit our great nation, just like the pandemic, just like the shortage of police officers, just like the shortage of teachers, just like all the drug overdoses, just like all the gun violence, just like all the childhood suicides, whenever we see these things, these are not good things. Whenever a nation is $30+ trillion in debt, these are not good things. Whenever we cannot build a county, state, or federal prison that before it gets built good, it's already full. These are not good things. Whenever you have an idiot across the water pertaining to poisonous Putin that has shut off the vast majority of the wheat supply coming from the Ukrainians, in addition towards what's going to happen next year because of them being displaced towards them not being able to grow wheat, in addition to the fertilizer cost, in addition to the petroleum cost, in addition to the inflation cost, these are not good things. And you have to start asking yourself the question, Our Father who art in heaven, why are these things happening to your children? And the answer is, my children are no longer acting like my children. Because there's certain requirements that God expects out of his children, and whenever his children are no longer doing those things, guess what? God is no longer having to be obligated of being their carekeeper. In other words, whenever it says that I will be with you even unto the ends of the world, and I will stick with you even closer than a brother, he no longer has to fulfill those duties. You know why? Because in reality, what you're doing with your life, in your life, is not lining up with the qualifications of being his children. And whenever you're not his children, then he no longer has to protect either that particular individual or that group or that community or that nation in response to that group of people or that person no longer functioning as a true child of God. There is requirements that most preachers does not teach on that we must endure, regardless of how enticing that the LGBTQ community may look, regardless how tempting that it may be for you to change your whole makeup of your whole identity, you know that the Bible teaches that these things are at the bottom of the pit, towards basically scraping the bottom of the barrel, towards being an abomination. It's one thing to say a little naughty word every now and then. It's one thing if you're not exactly honest towards maybe telling a little white lie, but according to the Bible, one sin is just as great as the other sin. But whenever you step off into a lifestyle of living like the LGBTQ community lives, and like I said, I've been down to the Key West, Florida, whenever they was having their little festival. I couldn't believe it, all the nudity openly that I was seeing, not just at night, but during the day. They expose themselves just like the Mardi Gras towards lifting up their blouses so that somebody can throw them some beads. But, you know, I've talked to various people that work for law enforcement down there in regards towards the things that they have to endure and the things that they have to see. And what they tell me, you know, like the Coast Guard that goes out on the Gulf down there because maybe they got a mayday, somebody's motor went bad or something. Once they get down into that area and they start looking around, they see some of the most whorish, ungodly, basically orgies that are participated in those and on those vessels. Plus they got a big lake down there south of Louisiana that they basically live and flaunt around. You know, they're the Frenchmen's. That's where that movement began. Free love. The love culture. That's where the Woodstock got influence pertaining to the love culture and drug culture and all the other cultures. Well, whenever you have a imbalance to the point that now you have more of the ungodly than you have the godly, then God walks away from his obligations, and he basically looks at Lucifer and says, sick them. Give them what they deserve. And that's whenever Satan and Satan's followers does just exactly that, and they find great pleasure in doing so. And the reason why they find great pleasure in doing so is because they was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. And it's our fault, it's our personal faults, whoever falls prey to this, towards becoming a patsy with this Luciferian Lucifer that has now inundated our planet pertaining to sorcery and demonic activity. And like I said, whenever the balances get out of tune to the point that there's more of the ungodly or the wicked than there are the godly, that's whenever God basically pulls his hand of protection away from that particular group of people, because he's no longer obligated to protect that group of people towards all these horrible, horrible, bad things that continue to keep happening to us. So, yes, it is our responsibility as Christians to bring these things out, to tell these people that what they're engaged in and what they're doing is bringing hardship upon not just the guilty but also the innocent. And if the people that claim to be godly are not opposed to these things the same as I am, because the Bible teaches us that, then I question their true, authentic relationship with the Heavenly Father to begin with. We should have just as much hate towards the ways of the devil as we have love for the ways of righteousness. And if we don't have hate against abomination, against rapes, against murders, against theftery, against liars, against lawbreakers, against drug dealers, against people that's living in the LGBT community, if we don't have a sense of hate, and let me verify this, it's not that we hate the person, we hate the activities of the person. We still love the person. We still love their soul. We pray every day that you'll turn from your sinful and wicked ways, and that you won't take this to your grave to the point of you being judged according to your lifestyle or according to the position that you have made a conscious choice towards being rebellious against God. We pray for your soul every day, because we, if you're a true Christian, does not want nobody to go to hell, even your worst enemies. You may hate what that they have done to you. You may hate towards what they're doing to you. You may hate some of the things that they have done to your family or your friends. But you're still supposed to love their soul, because obviously they have made the wrong turn, similar towards how that we have made wrong turns. And thank God there was people that was praying in intervention for us, to the point that we become awakened in realizing that this was not what God intended for us to be, and we turned from that wickedness, and we didn't partake in the depths of Satan that way. So think about that whenever you're looking at not just the teachers, but also the deputies, the law enforcement agencies out there. And there's also a shortage of airplane pilots and stewardess. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is there a shortage of them? Why is there? I thought they paid good money. Well, because it's confusion. The airplane industry cannot keep up with their obligations towards the people. There's too many dissatisfied people, and besides that, they don't want to take a chance on being around all these other different people from all these other different countries and possibly taking a chance towards catching a disease. That's why. Whenever it comes to the teaching methods of a teacher, especially down in Florida, to put them on a pedestal of them being sued because they did not use the proper wording or technique in regards towards the LGBTQ community, I think personally is absolutely appalling. The same way that I think is appalling towards defunding law enforcement, regardless whether it be county, state, or federal, because without our first responders, we're basically at our wits' end, and at that point in time, basically the criminal society will take over what's left of the decent society. And if that's what we want, then continue to go down the path that we're on towards defunding this and defunding that, and going after the teachers and suing them, and having shortages of deputies, and we're looking at a recipe of disaster. And if that's what we want, then that's what we're going to get. But it's up to people like me to point these things out and to say, you know what, there's a better way if you just stop and listen. But we're going to have to stop and listen, and we're going to have to make a conscious choice towards taking a right-hand turn versus a left. That's the bottom line. If we're going to climb out of this storm and get back on good sailing, whatever.
Well, Americans have pumped billions of taxpayer dollars over the past 3 years into schools through emergency programs. You mentioned one of them.
Right.
Can the federal government force governors to reallocate those funds? I mean, how do you actually get governors to do what you're asking them to do?
Right. It's not really about forcing. It's about working with them. But let's face it, this teacher shortage is a symptom of something that's been going on for longer than the pandemic, and that's a teacher respect issue. Unless we're serious about providing competitive salaries for our educators, better working conditions, so that they can continue to grow.
Is it really just about salaries?
It's definitely not just about salaries, but let's think back the last couple of years. Our educators have bent over backwards. We went from totally in-person learning to remote learning overnight. Yet the pandemic really pushed many of these educators out of the profession because in many cases, educators were not being respected when schools had to close. It created some tensions in our schools. We need to make sure we're supporting our educators, giving them the working conditions where they feel connected to the community and feel supported in the work that they're doing.
But at the same
In the
time,
meantime, it's a matter of
but at the same
That's for
time,
students.
you have to look at some of the children
Educators get
in regards towards some of those kids, because of the handicaps that they may have, the mental challenges that they have. It may be best that they was taught digitally offline rather than be in a big group of people. Some people just can't adapt. Some people are not adaptable. I don't know what they went through. I don't know what they're fighting or what's going on. But there are some children out there that just don't fit in well with a group of other kids. And if it reaches that level, then those kids should be pulled to the side. They used to call it special ed up here, or something like special ed, where the children basically rode around in a little short bus because they didn't have as many of them. People with special needs, people with strong mental challenges, and some of those children that are now showing up in areas that they can't fit in probably need to be taught online, digitally, because of the problems that they're going, the hurdles and the challenges that they're going to have to face in the process of being engaged in a public setting of school.
Giving them the working conditions where they feel connected to the community and feel supported in the work that they're doing. Critically important work.
But in the meantime, it's a matter of what's best for students. And I want to ask you, we are seeing districts and change the qualifications so that instructors can be there in class. Oklahoma eliminated a general education test certification requirement. Arizona now allows people without a college degree to begin teaching before they graduate. In Illinois, people can teach in a classroom with just 90 hours of college education. This looks, Mr. Secretary, like the standards and quality of American education are being lowered.
Right, and it's unfortunate. Our students need more now, not less. And while I understand that there are issues getting qualified educators into the classroom, we've been working really closely with our states to give them not only the resources, but the ideas on how to help address the short-term issue, incentivizing.
Do you support these ideas?
Back in. I do not support lowering any standards for qualifications with teachers. I think we need to be creative in how we get the teachers in. For example, student teaching is 4 months of teaching without pay. I think we should use the American Rescue Plan dollars to get student teachers and give them a salary. Many people are leaving the profession or training programs for the profession because they cannot afford 4 months of teaching without salary. I think we need to raise the bar on making sure teachers are getting paid what they're due. The teaching profession, college graduates earn on average 33% less than other college educated programs or other college educated jobs. That's unacceptable. In the last 25 years, when you adjust for inflation, teachers have made only $29 more than they did 25 years ago. We need to do better there, and that will address some of these shortage issues.
Are you looking at targeted debt relief, student debt relief for those teachers who are in programs like you just mentioned?
Certainly, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is up and running. We provided a waiver for 1 year to widen the net of people that can take advantage of that. So for those of you who are listening, studentaid.gov, check out to see if you're eligible now for student loan relief. If you're a public servant and you've worked for 10 years, you should have your loans forgiven. We want to make the process simpler, but we're also focusing on making sure the loan forgiveness that we're providing goes to those folks who have been taken advantage of by their institutions. All total, Margaret, $32 billion since day one of this administration in loan cancellation for those who either have total and permanent disability, those who have been taken advantage of by their institutions of higher education. We're not slowing down. We want to make sure that college is more accessible and more affordable for Americans across the country.
Do you have a decision for us then on what's going to happen at the end of this month for families budgeting in terms of whether there will be a suspension of some of those student debt programs?
Sure. I don't have a decision for you today, but what I will tell you that daily we're having conversations about this, and the American folks will hear it before the end of the month.
We spoke to the superintendent of Los Angeles School District just last Sunday, and he told us that there are roughly 10 to 20,000 children who are just simply missing. No idea where they went.
Right.
How widespread is this problem of lost children in American school systems?
It's a concern not only in Los Angeles, but in other parts of our country, in particular our urban centers, where we know the pandemic impacted urban centers where their density is higher. Many families moved out of cities. So the work that I've seen happening across the country that I'm really proud of is the work where districts are now hiring folks to work community liaisons, family liaisons, where they're knocking on doors, finding students, bringing them back into the classroom, re-engaging them. It is an issue. Oftentimes, it's not just education. The family is falling on hard times, or they've had loss in their family. So providing the support that they need is something that we're encouraging our schools to do, and we look forward to getting those students back, getting those families back into the classroom.
Oftentimes also, let's look at all the details here, that once a young man or a young woman that's no longer considered a child enters into college, for the first semester or two, it's kind of fun, it's new, it's creative, it's energetic. But then once they realize that they are sacrificing their time in getting this education, and then after they get the education, regardless whether it's on a 2-year term, 4-year term, 6-year term, 8-year term, depending upon what industry that they want to get embark up into. Is the jobs going to be out there available after they sacrifice all this kind of time? And for the past 15 to 20 years, you have to admit, the college industry teaching aid has failed whenever it comes to guaranteeing people, once they complete their courses and they get a diploma in this or that, there's probably less than 30% of them that actually has the opportunity to actually go after that in which what they have pursued. So it's a matter of maturity in these men and young men and women's lives, that after they get over the new, over the fun part of going to college, see it every year, almost every semester, right up the road here in UTM Martin. Basically, it's a suitcase college town where you stay in courses during the week, and then on the weekend you travel back home wherever that you come from. Most of the time it's local. Some of the people can't do that because it's too far away. But these people start becoming mature in their mental telepathy or their mental conception, and they start understanding, well, you know what? Rather than me sacrifice another 2 years in college, why don't I just go ahead and take this opportunity where this factory over here is now offering a beginner's pay of $17 an hour and a sign-on bonus of $500? Because the college industry, the college schooling industry has failed to protect its clients in regards towards guaranteeing them a job, a position, after they have completed their course. I think that is a big turnoff towards people starting to thinking that they're going to do this, but then after they get involved in it, it's like, you know what, I don't think I want to do this. It's costing too much money, putting my life on hold. I could be doing this. I could be doing that. It's just not worth it. And of course, if you look at the statistics towards what has happened in the past 10 years in the college industry, pertaining to either private colleges or universities or whatever, the statistics really go really in the opposite direction towards how badly society has been taken in, or I'm going to actually use the word played, by these college professors and these colleges. And these parents have been played towards being out all this money, and they didn't get the bang for the buck. They didn't get the bang for the buck, and basically now they've got all these tuition fees that they have to pay back. They never did get that position, even though they may have gotten that diploma. And it's just a failure. It's all out and out failure. And it's like, you know what? People are getting tired of being taken in by this appealing industry that is supposed to guarantee me my efforts of my work, that after I get through sacrificing all this stuff, I get an opportunity for the brass ring. And most of them do not get that opportunity for that brass ring. Now, you can blame it on previous politicians of selling us downstream, pertaining to the NAFTA Act, pertaining to having to work now with a global society versus working with an independent nation that at one time used to be number one in almost every facet that you could think of. Now we live in a very competitive world to where now everybody competes with everybody else. But the fact of the matter is, the college schooling industry has lost a great deal of its persona in what that it used to at one time used to stand for back in the early 1900s. Throughout the early 1900s, before World War I, before World War II, after World War II, during the Vietnam War, etc., the college industry profession has lost its persona in its own glory towards being able to guarantee that once a person dedicates this type of time, energy, and money, that they're going to have a bang, or they're going to have a good chance towards going for the brass ring to be able to start out making a decent salary. I have heard this again and again and again, and there ain't no telling us how many other people that's heard it, probably millions, of a person that does get the degree, and then they're either forced to have to move from here to Washington State, or maybe they got to go to another country, and basically they're down here at McDonald's flipping burgers for a minimum wage, but yet now they've sacrificed 2, 3, 4, 6 years of college. People are waking up to this. And it's one thing to be talking about your elementary schools, and it's another thing to be talking about your college schools. But the bottom line is this: we have been failed as citizens to our own system here in our great nation by our politicians, our predecessors before us, and because of it, it's knocked the wind out of a great deal of people's sails, including the school industry, regardless whether it's the elementary or the high school or the college industry. It has really knocked them in the head, because I didn't get my schooling like I should have had. I regret that I didn't now. I regret that I didn't at least get my GED. But I use my talents and my skills with my hands towards different occupations, regardless whether you're a plumber, electrician, auto body technician, a mechanic, a diesel mechanic, a welder. I could go down a long list. But you know what? In those industries today, whenever I was growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, 90s, and etc., you really didn't have to have that much education to be able to get involved in those professions and still make a career out of it. Today, if you don't have proper schooling, you're probably not even going to be qualified to work as a janitarian in a school, much less participate in some of their activities. I know this just to be able to work at the golf course down the road here in Union City at Midway Airport. If you don't have a degree in chemistry and knowing about different chemicals, which I think it requires at least 2 years, they won't even look at you towards hiring you, because they don't want to hire somebody that's supposed to be working on their lawns, and all of a sudden they get mixed up with the chemicals, and they spray something on their greens, and the next thing you know, it damages or kills their greens. So all of these different professions now require a great deal of schooling. It requires reading and writing and arithmetic. It requires different things, and that's the areas that need to be focused upon in the generations coming up, rather than compromise on those qualifications. If anything, they need to up the ante. And if anything, what we need to do as a nation is that we need to take other countries like Japan and China and use them as a milestone of that in which what we need to do and perform if we're going to be compatible in the workforce in the future. if we do anything, we need to intensify our learning skills and make it more appealing and put the guarantees out there that, you know what, if you get this degree, we promise you, you will be able to get a job at this particular rate, and you will be able to pay back your tuition fees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As far as I'm concerned, the college industry for the past 20 years has been a complete, total failure in a lot of different ways. It has been a failure. And whenever I go up here at Martin, Tennessee, and I look at all them children with all them parents that has all these big dreams towards thinking, you know what, if I put little Johnny or little Sally through college, they'll be able to do a whole lot better or greater than what I've done. And then whenever they put little Johnny and little Sally through college, and they turn out to be a total failure, or they're down here working for McDonald's flipping burgers, you kind of get the image of what I'm talking about towards how the schooling, college industry, especially the college industry, has failed in its obligations to the people. The same way with the politicians. They have failed their obligations to the people. The same with our law enforcement agencies that want to pick at little nitpicky stuff, or they'll allow for certain people to do certain things in the county that they know good and well that they're getting rich off of towards doing illegal activity, but they're burning the candle on both ends, because now the lawyers get to make the money, the counselors get to make the money, the probation officers get to make the money, the courts make the money, the judges make the money, the jail industry makes the money. It's a money thing. It ain't about peace. It's about survival. And a lot of people, after they engage in a certain amount of college, after they get over the fun, they start realizing, you know what? I'm wasting my time. I'm wasting my talents and my gifts, and now I'm going to have to make a conscious choice towards what do I need to do for my own self, for my own self needs, to take care of myself, because obviously the college industry and the school profession industry is not going to take care of me. So this is an area that the United States federal government really needs to look a real strong, hard look at towards if we're going to have any type of a future at all in the next 15, 20, 25, 30 years from now. We're going to have to really brush up on some things for our teachers, for different types of industry jobs, and we're going to have to really sharpen the pencil on this if we're going to come out on top. And if not, we're going to continue to throw good money to bad, and we're going to continue to see good minds and good lives wasted because the opportunities was not there. The opportunities was not there that they was promised that if they done this, and this, that they was going to be rewarded for this. But then once they see all these cracks where all these other people ain't getting that, and then they start identifying, well, I'm probably not going to get it neither. And then it's like, well, you know, this is just a hopeless situation. I just was go out here and get on drugs like everybody else and just throw my life away. That's what's happened to America. That's what's happened in the schooling industry performances, beginning at elementary, going all the way up to your highest degree of colleges. It's really been a failure, especially for the past 10, 15, 20 years. It's really been a complete, total disaster. And it's sad. It is so sad that we have taken back seat in how that all these other nations now are performing and getting ahead with their technology. They're getting ahead with their artistical creativity. They're getting ahead pertaining to a lot of their jobs, architect designs. What you got to really put a lot of mental thought to. They're getting ahead in the medical industry in a lot of these countries. They're getting ahead with their traveling. Like over in Europe and places where you can get on a daggum train now and go almost as fast as you can in an airplane. I mean, we have lacked in so many areas here in America on so many different levels. It just makes me want to take my hands and cover my face and crawl up underneath a table somewhere, because I am so ashamed of what that we have turned out to be. And to think that we're going to fancy over some sort of festival down on the Key West, Florida, pertaining to the LGBTQ community, or to think that we're all going to load up and go down to the Mardi Gras so somebody can pull up their blouse and we can see their nipples on their tits. That way we can throw them some beads. Is that the best that we can do? Really? Are we not no better than that? It's sick. It's a disappointment. It's a failure. And so many teachers are struggling with these performances to the point that they just basically throw up their hands, kind of like a cop working for law enforcement. And it doesn't just have to be down in New Orleans, but so many of them are saying, you know what, it ain't worth it. We've given our best shot. Our government has failed us. Our potential was there, but the opportunities was not. And because of it, I'm just going to stay at home. I'm just going to be a deadhead. I'm just going to live out what little bit of enjoyment that I can, and then let the rest of it go to hell in a handbasket. That's what our professional people have done to us. That's what our politicians, that's what our ministers, that's what our doctors, that's what our judges, that's what our attorneys, that's what our smart people pertaining to the educational system has done to all of us. And it's sickening to watch how much of a failure that we have turned into just within the past 30 years, whenever a government decided to go left instead of going right.
When I spoke to you a few months ago, you pointed out the drop in enrollment, specifically of the youngest Americans, kindergartners, preschoolers. I know that the CDC has loosened some of the guidelines for schools when it comes to COVID health guidance. Each district decides its own policies. But right now, we are seeing COVID spread. We are seeing monkeypox spread among children. Why isn't the Biden administration hosting town halls, informing people more directly, instead of having these very confusing and changing CDC guidelines?
Exactly.
As a father myself, my children's safety is my priority, and it's the priority for me that all students are safe and can go to school healthy. That's why we've been fighting from day one to increase vaccination efforts, to make sure that the schools have the tools for the mitigation strategies that they need, that we have information. Last week I spoke to Dr. Walensky and Dr. Jha from the White House about this upcoming school year, and we feel very optimistic that it's going to be a great year, that families shouldn't be worried right now about monkeypox, and that we have the tools that we need to give students vaccination to keep them safe in our schools. I want our families thinking about how this year is going to be a better year than last year. We have better tools, better resources, and we should expect a better school year for our students and our families.
So it's going to be a banner year, is that what you're saying? I know it's not going to be a banner year for the farmers around here. A lot of farmers have really failed tremendously because of the non-cooperation with Mother Nature. If we don't awaken in this type of cesspool that we have been drug off into by the works of the devil in being deceived and manipulated, will never be able to get on top again the way that the generation before us back during the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even throughout the 90s was on top of their game. We're going to have to come out of this bewitching that is falling upon this great nation with all this demonic sorcery and wickedness that now isn't just in behind the closet per se, but now it's out in the open. And it's multiplying. It's getting worse. Do you really think that God is going to bless a nation that has turned its back on Him? As I have said before, and I'll say again, whenever you continue to bite the hand that feeds you, eventually the hand will quit feeding you. The Heavenly Father does not have to be obligated to you, even though you may claim that you're a believer, even though you may claim that you're a Christian, but your lifestyle is far from that. Proof is in the pudding. You're not going to be able to fool God, because God is the all-knowing. He knows everything about us. He knows more about us, the Bible says, than what we know about ourselves. I struggle with various physical handicaps and various physical temptations every day whenever I wake up. Every day. That's the reason why I try to make it a point to go in prayer before I ever step foot outside to pray. Father God, please be with me. Lead me, O Lord, not into temptation. Deliver me from evil. And I pray for my children, and I pray for my grandchildren, and I pray for my nation, and I pray for the elderly, and I pray for the weak. I pray for the ones that's being abused and used. And I pray most of all that His holy, divine will be done, regardless of what it may be. If it takes a drought, so be it. If it takes a pandemic, then so be it. If it takes the failure of a nation being $30 trillion, then so be it. Whatever it takes, I pray that God's will be done to get us back to where we were supposed to have been, that we never should have faltered from to begin with, but because of various unforeseen, unintended consequences, now we're where we're at today. Too much greed, too much selfishness, and too many people steered away from the righteousness of God. And now it's turned into a cesspool. And an individual like him with a nice looking suit, good looking shirt and tie with the American flag, looks like he's been shaved real elegantly. He's got these nice looking glasses. Hair looks like it's got a little bit of mousse in it. Got a real tight look about himself. He's got an ear thing in his right ear, which would be to our left side, where he's listening to the commentary, giving him advice or whatever. He looks really, really good on the outside, doesn't he? This individual, I mean, he looks like $1 million. Looks like a Philadelphia lawyer that just got through coming out of the courthouse, doesn't he? But what's on the inside? What's in between those rib cages? What's underneath that red tie and that white shirt pertaining to his heart? What's in that head pertaining to his mind? How does he really think? What's making him tick inside? That's where the real you gets discovered. Towards how much that you truly care about our future and our children's future, and where we go from this point on. Of rather not we go further down deeper into the pit of misery and despair, or rather not we pull up our bootstraps and we start making progress and we come out on top again. What's going on within that individual is what I want to know, because Christ said that they would come in sheep's clothing that would give the appearance but would be nothing more than imposters, because they would be raging wolves inside. People with selfish motivations that basically could care less about the system, could care less about our nation, could care less about our children or about our future. I hope to God that that's not him. I hope to God that what he's saying on the outside, that he means that on the inside. But how do we know that unless the facts follow what he embarks his life up into?
Mr. Secretary, I think we all hope for that. Thank you for your time.
Yes. Thank you.
Face the Nation will be back in 1 minute. Stay with us.
Stay with us. You know, you got all these commentators probably making $150,000, $200,000 a year.
All of the agency.
And whenever it comes to the people's reality versus the
About Trump via today.
versus the politicians' reality versus the commentary reality versus the news media's reality, it's no comparison pertaining to the type of money that they get paid to be put on TV and do their little spill versus the type of money that the real people actually make. And it basically turns into the 1%ers versus the 99%ers. And apparently Donald Trump was right pertaining to our media being fake news media, are flipping what they're trying to do in their own little professional way, but in reality they're so far away from reality towards what's actually going on the streets of Harlem, Queens, Manhattan, LA, Atlanta, Miami, San Francisco, Chicago, St. Louis, Dallas, Houston. I mean, I can go on and on and on with these big metropolitan areas towards the grief-stricken people that have been let down by our government. Was Donald Trump right whenever he said it's time to drain the swamp? Absolutely. But how can you drain the swamp if the swamp creatures are still in the swamp? How are you going to be able to drain the swamp whenever the same professors that was teaching up here at UTM today was the same ones that was in there 15 or 20 years ago? Are the same politicians that the people has elected towards being in there today that was in there 15 or 20 or more years ago? How you gonna drain the swamp if you still got the same swamp creatures of the old way of thinking, and they're the ones that has allowed this thing to get out of hand to the point of giving the farm away. They have sold us out, and now we're all left backpedaling, and now people's lives are being destroyed on account of it.
The head of the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, announced a complete systemic overhaul of the agency, citing its botched COVID response. For more on those proposals and other
This right here was a total complete failure. It was a failure upon the Donald Trump's administration, pertaining to him being in denial about the COVID-19. Then they turned it into a joke, to the point that I guess you was supposed to drink bleach, or one day we was supposed to all wear a mask, and the next day we wasn't supposed to wear a mask. It got to the point that you didn't know who to believe or what to believe. And as far as I'm concerned, the CDC has been a complete total failure to the American people, And I can't speak for the rest of the world, but they have been a complete total failure, as far as I'm concerned, of people that was probably making $500,000, maybe $1 million a year. We're talking about people that are considered to be high-grade scientists, doctors, people that has made a profession out of this, have made such of an ass out of themselves in the past 2.5, 3 years because of this COVID crisis. And now it looks like we're possibly going to be embarked up into another crisis, and possibly even another crisis. I don't know. They're saying now that they've found polio in places in New York and other places throughout the world. So, I mean, it's just one despairing event after another, that obviously we have done something incredibly wrong. Incredibly wrong as a Homo sapien society upon this planet, for all these hardships to fall upon to us the way that they have just within the past few years. And if you don't try to clean the cup from the inside rather than clean it from the outside, according to the Lord Jesus Christ, if the salt has lost its potency, it's utterly no good other than to be trampled down by the foot of man. We have our ministers to thank for that, because they did not teach and preach and live a good, stern, righteous, holy life. You can get on TV, you can make all your little TV shows all you want, you can do all your little Facebook things or YouTube things, you can have your own little personal podcast, you can get on TV and you can speak in 17,000 different languages that can't nobody, including yourself, identify, other than it being a bunch of mumbo jumbo. But the bottom line is this: regardless whether it's the United Pentecostal, the Independent Pentecostal, the Baptist, the Presbyterian, the Methodist, the Church of Christ, I could go on and on and on. Obviously, proof is in the pudding towards somebody has made a left turn whenever they should have taken a right. And I know it just appalls them whenever somebody like me wants to use, to them it's a negative stance, because nobody wants to be told what to do in America, as far as, criticizing somebody. But there is such thing as constructive criticism. And this is an area that I feel like so many people in America has walked away from. You don't use constructive criticism on people to harm them or to hurt them or to shame them or to humiliate them. You use constructive criticism as a tool, as being a teacher, to be able to bring your points out to where maybe these same people that made those mistakes will quit making the same mistakes, and maybe they'll turn this thing around. But it's got to the point now in today's society, everybody wants to wear their feelings on their shirt sleeve, and if you get a little loud, or if you say something a little abrupt, or if you mention something that's really a very, very sensitive subject, well, they'll just turn you off. We live in a throwaway society. We live in a society that they'll just turn you off. Well, that's what's wrong with us. We keep turning off. Everybody wants to be the chief. Don't nobody want to be the Indians. And it's turned into nothing but a big hullabaloo pertaining to our lifestyles and what is going on in the world. And unless we're smart enough to identify that and change and learn from those mistakes, we're never going to make it like Christ anticipates in us making it, as the first 3 chapters of Revelations discusses, for I have not found thy works perfect yet, to go back, and do thy first works over again, for I have not found thy works perfect yet. Who is he talking to there? Is he talking to the ungodly? No. Is he talking to the atheists? No. Is he talking to the reprobates? No. Is he talking to the devil worshippers? No. He's talking to the church. He's talking to the bride. Because God is not going to come back to gather up his elect from the 4 corners of the earth until the bride gets her act together. And if you claim to be a born-again Christian through the blood of Jesus Christ, you're part of the bride. And if you're not living the way that the Bible requires for us to live, then you need to question your authenticity with your relationship with the Heavenly Father towards whether or not you're truly born again or not. You can act your way all you want to act your way. You can put on all the clean clothes and look awful sharp. But deep down inside that heart and inside that mind, God's going to know what's going on. God's going to have you figured out better than you have figured out yourself, according to the Bible.
Viral outbreaks. Margaret spoke earlier with Dr. Deborah Birx, a former CDC official who served as coronavirus response coordinator under former President Trump.
Good morning, Dr. Birx.
Good morning, Margaret. Great to be with you.
You know, this was an incredible acknowledgement by the CDC director just a few days ago about the agency that she runs. And Dr. Walensky said to CDC employees, to be frank, quote, we are responsible for some pretty dramatic, pretty public mistakes, from testing to data to communications. This is our watershed moment. And she outlined these proposed changes to institutional culture, accountability, communication, timeliness. Do you agree, doctor, with her diagnosis?
I'm thrilled that she had Jim McRae and did this work, because a lot of directors would have just tried to tweak, and tweaking the agency at this point was not going to be successful. This is an inflection point.
And they have to be approved still by the HHS secretary. I mean, do you think that it is enough for a bureaucracy to try to fix itself, or does Congress need to step in and legislate here?
Well, there's certain things that Congress needs to do, and the number one thing is to stop trying to create a parallel data system. In many countries, the public health system and the clinical system are one. In our country, they have been separate, and it has failed us.
Back in January of 2021, when we spoke, I remember you saying you didn't trust the CDC data that you were getting during the Trump administration. So if Dr. Walensky's saying that this is a problem, how does she actually fix it? Are you saying that the government can't do it alone, that it needs private industry to step in?
Yes, and that was the way we were able to get the data. First and foremost, in March of 2020, all of our data that I used to warn Americans of who was at risk for severe disease, hospitalization, and death came from our European colleagues. That in itself should be an indictment of our system. Secondly, reporting was coming in extraordinarily slow from hospitals through a system that CDC had created. And I know this created controversy, but for 3 months I asked the CDC to fix its system and develop a partnership with clinics and hospitals and laboratories, and they wouldn't. And so that's why I asked all the hospitals to start reporting, and they did. And so I think sometimes we hold ourselves back. The private sector is willing to help us. Another issue I've had with the CDC, I've asked them over and over again, if you're going to issue guidance like the 5 days and return to work in a mask, show the data transparently that you utilize to come to that decision. Because I think when Americans saw that it was a very small number, that they would have really reconsidered those guidelines. And so you really need the information. Americans are smart. They can process the information, give them all of the data.
Sorry, to pick up on what you just said, you are saying that the current CDC guidance of being able to return to work after 5 days if you wear a mask is based on flawed data?
Well, it's based on what we call in medicine a convenience data set. Rather than all Americans. We've had millions and millions of infections, and we could have tracked Americans over that time period. We could have said to people, test on day 3, test on day 6, test on day 9. They would have seen that the antigen test was still positive in most cases out to 9, 10, and 11. And we have to assume, until we have better data, that you're infectious if your antigen test is positive. And so we had, and I think this is the problem. I've studied.
Why would the CDC do that? Are you suggesting that there is a concern here due to the worker shortage or political interference? Why would they tell people to return to work if there's no way they'd actually have cleared the virus within a short period of time?
Well, there definitely was a worker shortage. But I think when we have that happen, we have to be very clear. We can say to people, we think you're still shedding some virus, and that's why we're telling you to wear a mask. And a crude indication that you're still shedding virus is your antigen test. And so we're really not using the tools that we have to ensure Americans can both survive and then thrive. And we do have tools. We have so many better tools now.
Well, I raised political interference because, as you know, during the Trump administration, and you felt some of this, that was one of the criticisms. But when it comes to the CDC advice, I mean, if you go through it, people may forget, we had field hospitals in the middle of Central Park and refrigerator trucks moving dead bodies. We've come a long way here, but the CDC guidelines on masks was wrong. It was wrong when it came to the tests they were trying to create and deploy. They were telling people to take their temperature, not realizing there was asymptomatic community spread. Are we at the point where you cannot rebuild public trust? I mean, is the agency worth reforming?
Well, the way you rebuild public trust is be transparent. And I think that's in the report. Better data, better accountability, better transparency. But they also have to believe, and this gets to the culture piece, people can understand complicated issues. It's your job as a public health official. That's what public and public health means. Your job is to take complex situations and data and create graphs so that people can understand why you are making those recommendations. Recommendations that are created out of lack of transparency and out of a black box where you can't really follow the logic is what leads to fracturing and trust. And you really have to work to reestablish that. It can be done, but they have to change how they collect data, how they present data, and how they communicate to the American people.
I want to ask you about monkeypox. It was first detected in May in this country. Now it's a public health emergency, and there are reports of it spreading among children, particularly in the state of New York right now. As parents send their kids back to school, what do they need to know?
Well, I think what just was so disturbing to me about monkeypox is a lot of the issues that got us into the ditch with COVID were repeated. Those mistakes were repeated with monkeypox. Not adequate testing early on, not making tests available in every community that you knew was at risk. I mean, we had the roadmap of who was at risk. We should have immediately made it tests available through the Gay and Bisexual Network. They are very responsible people. They're very knowledgeable about prophylaxis and preventing disease because they've been doing it for decades. This is a highly informed group. If they had communicated to that group, if they had provided testing, if they had provided vaccines to all of them in May, we wouldn't have this problem in August. And so 5 months has gone by. Just like what happened with COVID, lack of preparation, lack of engagement, lack of utilization of the tools that we had in real time to prevent this 14,000, and probably it's well over 20,000 now. And remember, it can be spread, yes, skin to skin, but it can also be spread through clothing and linen. And so we just have to tell people, if you have any kind of lesion, please get tested, because you can spread it unknowingly to your household. You can spread it unknowingly to your family members. You can spread it unknowingly to your friends and to your children. And I'm worried about long-term care facilities because it could, also spread in long-term care facilities because of wandering. We should know right now, is monkeypox killed in cold water Or do you need to wash the clothing and everything in hot water? I mean, these are practical solutions that the American people need.
Dr. Birx, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Margaret. Always good to see you.
And we'll be right back with a lot more Face the Nation. Stay with us.
What if you were a global bank?
But at the same time, they're not looking at the spirituality of these diseases that has come into play, or God has allowed to come into play, towards basically under the example of what the Bible teaches, that in the last days he will sever the wicked from among the just. We know that these lifestyles are against God's will according to the Bible, and we know that in exchange to doing things against God's will again and again and again, especially once it reaches this level, there's consequences. And once more, the bad thing about the consequences that's falling upon to the guilty of those that have created or helped to create this, I'm going to use the expression of a plague. You can terminologize it any way you want to, as it being some sort of a organism, but I'm going to use it in the terminology of it being a plague. That what has brought this plague upon to the people, because now it's not just affecting the guilty, but it's also affecting the innocent. And unless we're willing to acknowledge that, listen to these advisories, and then do something about our own personal lifestyles, or at least try to teach those that are engaged in those type of lifestyles that what you're doing is biblically wrong. And once more, it's not that we hate them, just like God does not hate them, but what he does hate is the sinful nature of what that we continue to do again and again and again, repeatedly, and we choose not to want to change our lifestyles, even though we're seeing the signs of the sorrows that has really and truly befallen upon to the world, like I never would have thought that I would have seen in my lifetime. I mean, I read about the Spanish flu. I read about various pandemics pertaining to the bubonic plague and leprosy in the Bible, and yellow fever and all these other different types of diseases that has come into various areas and basically just wiped out whole societies, whole cultures. I mean, they got a cemetery right up the road here in Martin that was called, I think it was called Yellow Fever, if I'm not mistaken, Yellow Fever Cemetery, or maybe some other kind of pandemic name. But there was so many people at one time that it was dropping like flies in the town of Frost before it became Martin, that they named cemeteries after it. Named cemeteries after the pandemic. So these things that we're witnessing, first of all, they're not new. But secondly, we have to also examine the character of the characteristics of these diseases, and we know what will stifle the disease ordinarily is cold weather, and what will enhance the disease is the hot weather towards seeing these germs grow. And because of global warming, I truly believe that we're going to see more and more outbreaks, because it leaves the manifestation of human as well as biological cells to produce and reproduce and form in algae water and in other animals that ordinarily would not perform if our seasons was according to the way that our seasons is supposed to be. There's a reason why that the world spins the way that it does, and it don't go the other way. There's a reason why that it gets cold in the winter and it gets warm in the summer. There's a reason for these things, because the upper levels of the equator deals with things that the equator people don't have to deal with. The equator people have to deal with the things that the equator people have to deal with, because they're basically subtropical. They got animals, they got vegetation that lives in those areas, they got stuff that's growing, algae and stuff that's growing in those areas that don't grow ordinarily in Wisconsin or in Wyoming or in Canada. And there's a reason for that.
Lenza! I'm gonna find a Lenza! Good. You know, I love a cup of coffee. Too Splenda. I remember. Blending tree. You win.
You win.
Fears of nuclear catastrophe are mounting in Eastern Europe as Moscow and Kyiv accuse each other
Here we go
of shelling
again.
a nuclear power plant in southeastern Ukraine, the largest such plant on the continent. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Charlie Daga is in Ukraine with more.
Black smoke rises above the Russian Navy headquarters in Crimea. The apparent drone strike is the latest in a string of high-profile attacks penetrating air defenses deep within Russian-held territory. More fighting has been reported near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as Russia and Ukraine allow inspectors from the nuclear watchdog IAEA access to the complex. Nearly 6 months since the Russian invasion began, we revisited the scenes of some of the worst fighting in the early days of the war. The airfield at Hostomel on the outskirts of Kyiv, where outnumbered Ukrainian forces fought off elite Russian paratroopers intent on taking it over. The extraordinary amount of damage here tells the story of the ferocious firefight that took place at this airfield, a battle that would prove critical in the fight for the capital itself. Back in early March, the children's summer camp near Bucha, where we found terrified Deputy Camp Director Tatiana sheltering elderly residents.
Please help us, I ask you. Next could be here. I ask you, come now.
We did go down where we found the elderly and young children hiding out, even as thunderous explosions rang out. Tatiana.
You know, it's very torturous in being in an environment like that, and I'm just going by what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. Whenever you're hearing explosions all around you and you don't know if the next one is going to wind up where you are. It's a torturous feeling in the middle of a combat zone of not knowing from 1 second to another whether or not you're going to be wounded, mortally wounded, or killed. It's a very torturous psychological mental anguish that a lot of people just can't bear. They can't take the pressure because it's so intense. And it's torturous. It can have a psychological effect upon to a human being the rest of his or her life. It's that bad. It would be the same thing if you was engaged in a bad hurricane and you was under that type of stress and that type of pressure for, let's say, 8 to 10 hours during the time that the storm went over, and then another hurricane went over within a 24-hour period, and then another hurricane went over within a 24-hour period, and then another hurricane come over within a 24-hour period. Your mind and your body, your emotions cannot take but just so much. And whenever you're in a combat zone and you steadily hearing bombs going off, not knowing when the next one is going to be you're under that type of emotional stress that can cause people to snap. Cause them to snap. And they'll never come out of it. then you got post-traumatic stress disorder.
We found Tatiana again, alive and well this week.
So war is torturous.
I'm so happy.
I'm glad to see you too, and thank you. Every day I remind you and say something.
You look so different.
Really?
In a good way.
We understand that we survive.
I want to weigh in on something. For what it's worth, they probably aren't going to say this on Face the Nation because this information just come through last night where Poisonous Putin's daughter basically got killed in an explosion attack in her car, in her automobile. I'm not going to say nothing negative towards her death because all death is bad. And I don't think nobody should take glory in anybody's death, even if they deserve it or their family members deserve it. But I will say this. The things that Poisonous Putin has done and is doing can only fall upon the feet of himself because of that in which what he embarked up into and upon to will in fact come full circle eventually to the point that not only will his children be in danger and his aunts and his uncles and his cousins and his nephews and his nieces, but he himself is in grave danger right now because of the despair that he has brought upon to his own people. Because the bottom line is this all could have been avoided, and this all could have been worked out in a diplomacy type way. War is the very opposite of peace. War is a very, very cruel, insensitive thing that is not prejudiced towards where it falls and who it falls on. Just like a disease. COVID was not prejudice. It didn't matter if you was old, young. It didn't matter if you was an attorney. It didn't matter if you was a judge. It didn't matter if you was a ball player. It didn't matter if you was a grandmother or grandfather. War is a very, very cruel, insensitive, torturous atmosphere to be involved in. So, to be quite honest with you, I feel sorry for the girl that got killed, but it's probably to be expected, along with his other aunts and uncles and nieces and cousins and distant aunts and second cousins and third cousins and anybody else that's associated with that parliament over there. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be more yet to come. Because whenever you get to looking at the practicality of war, whenever they say all is fair in love and war, it's just exactly that. What goes around comes back around. I feel so sorry for the people over in Russia and the people over in Ukraine because of the obvious madman, Poisonous Putin, that has brought this upon to society to the degree that now not only his supposable enemies are going to suffer, but now his own people, his own family members are going to suffer. He himself is going to suffer because he chose to do this the way that he chose to do it.
That night when I saw you.
Yes, that morning I decided that it is need to take out people from the downstairs. Can you
Okay.
help us? Thank you.
Well, I tried to help you. I didn't do much.
No, you do. You saved their life.
She said they were rescued the very next morning as Russian forces closed in. But other residential neighborhoods just like this are still getting flattened in the path of Russia's grinding military offensive and Ukraine's fight back, where territory gained and lost is measured not in miles, but feet. And there aren't many happy endings for those caught in the middle.
Charlie D'Agata reporting from Ukraine. We'll be right back.
Lot of
If you're like
pain,
a-
lot of anguish, a lot of suffering, cruelty. Very, very cruel. People that will be scarred the rest of their lives on account of a madman.
We'll be right back with much more Face the Nation. If you can't watch the full broadcast, you can set your DVR or watch us through our CBS or Paramount Plus app.
Paramount. Paramount.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm Ed O'Keefe in this morning for Margaret Brennan. We turn now to the FBI search at former President Trump's Florida resort. Ohio Congressman Mike Turner is a top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, and he joins us this morning from Dayton, Ohio. Congressman, great to have you with us. Thank you for being here. This past week, a Florida federal judge asked the Justice Department to prepare a redacted version of the affidavit that set off the FBI operation at the former president's home, signaling he may be willing to release it as early as this coming week. But affidavits aren't usually made public during an investigation so as to not impede the investigation. I'm curious, what level of disclosure would satisfy the demand for the release of the affidavit in your view?
Well, this is very revealing because the court has already made a ruling that they believe, and remember, the court knows what's in the affidavit, that portions of the affidavit can be released to the public. Now, what's important about this affidavit is it will give us the information to understand how did the FBI justify raiding Mar-a-Lago and spending 9 hours in the president's house. When we know the former president's home, they had other options besides just raiding the house. They could have gone and asked for the subpoena to be enforced. And the mystery sort of here deepens because we know Attorney General Garland himself has taken responsibility, said he approved it. And the American public want the Attorney General focused on issues like human and drug smuggling at the border. They were Chinese espionage, out of control crime in our cities. But if you're going to turn to this, if you're going to turn to the former president and Mar-a-Lago, they want to make certain that this is to the highest level. There's an imminent national security threat, and this affidavit will tell us, did they even allege so? Because in their document trying to keep the affidavit sealed, they didn't even allege that there was a national security threat.
We should point out there's a poll out this morning at another news organization that finds almost 6 in 10 Americans actually support continuing this investigation. So while there may be other big issues, there's certainly wide public interest in this one. You're an attorney, though. Why would releasing any information in this affidavit make sense and assure the former president not only a fair investigation by the Justice Department, but potentially, if it gets to that, a fair trial?
Well, I think you're citing polls, and there are lots of polls out there, by the way. The polls also indicate that people want to make certain that if this is an imminent national security threat, that it's pursued, but also they want to make certain that you don't have abuse of discretion here. And what our concern is from our committee is there's an allegation of classified documents that falls within our jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. And show us what you found, because the affidavit's going to have them tell publicly now what they told the court they were going to go find. Show us what you found. It certainly won't affect the investigation. We deal with classified documents and information all the time. Show us what it is that you went into the president's residence, spent 9 hours at former President Trump's residence. What is it that was at an imminent national security threat that you didn't just go to court and ask the court to order that the documents be delivered to them? Why did they spend?
They did. They did. I don't know who this guy is, but he ain't informed of the right stuff because they did do that. See, you got half-told truths that are basically lies because they're not telling the whole story and they're not telling the story correctly. The way that I understand it is that they attempted to get those records on several different levels at several different times, and once they realized that they was up against a brick wall, then inevitably they had to go do what they done. But they did try. They did want to secure that particular event where it didn't blow up into a major event like it has. But Donald Trump didn't want to cooperate. He didn't want to cooperate with what that they was requesting out of him. You got to go back to the original source. You got to go back to its original origin of how come they had to do what they done. This guy ain't telling the whole truth.
Resources of 30 agents that spent 9 hours in the preparation for that, when we have real imminent national security threats like Chinese espionage, the border, things that are going on in Ukraine, to take these resources and apply them here, certainly the American public wants to make certain this is not an abuse of discretion.
Well, I'm curious, since you're a member of the Intelligence Committee, what use could a former president have for classified or top secret information once he's left office?
Blackmail.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you have to ask him, but certainly we all know that every former president has access to their documents. It's how they write their memoirs. They don't have...
Could have been blackmail. Could have been over money. He could have sold some information. He could have maybe blackmailed the government. I still think it had to do with what he had to say pertaining to the American people still has not gotten down to 9/11. I still think it had to do with what the boiling point was whenever he was in New York City, whenever Saudi Arabia was financing that little event pretty close to where the 9/11 event happened, and the people was rearing up and rising up in such of a protesting way pertaining to how that Donald Trump could have ever embarked up into something that was being financed by the Saudi Arabian government after the golf professional tournament had already rejected Saudi Arabia. And that's what needs to happen. Our government needs to quit treating Saudi Arabia like they're some sort of an ally, because I guarantee you they're not. Their whole objective is for their Sharia law and their way of life to dominate the planet.
Have great recall of everything that's occurred in their administration, and we don't know that they were they're classified. We know, according to the FBI documents, that they were identified as marked classified. You have, of course, the former president saying that he declassified them themselves. But I think what's important here about this abuse of discretion, we have evidence of the FBI abusing that discretion and of misconduct on behalf of the FBI. The FBI, we had an attorney for the FBI that actually was convicted of doctoring an email to obtain a warrant against Trump. There's Trump's organization. You have the FBI using the Russia dossier, which has been proven to be debunked as evidence under a warrant that they submitted, all of which CBS has reported, and I have them up on my website, your own stories of these abuses of discretion. And the other question that we have is just recently, there was a raid on Project Veritas, which is a news organization, to supposedly retrieve President Biden's daughter's diary. Now, that's not certainly an imminent national security threat. It might be embarrassing to the president, but it's not something you'd see them do for an ordinary citizen. So there are real questions as what is the FBI doing here? It's the rank and file FBI agents. Everybody agrees. We support them. We have great faith in them. But the leadership of the FBI, when they undertake a raid against the current president's political rival, you have to ask these questions.
Real quick, are you aware of any standing order from President Trump that he might have had to a standing order to declassify documents he took from the Oval Office to the White House residence while he was in office?
I have never served in the White House. I would never have any knowledge of anything that occurred at the White
Okay,
House.
so the Intelligence Committee wouldn't know whether the president had a standing order.
Whether Biden does, whether anybody does, what they're declassifying. In fact, we weren't even notified when President Biden declassified all the information concerning the hunt for Zawahiri. And I was very surprised, the detail that they made public there. Very concerning as to how it might inform Al-Qaeda and future people that we're trying to target. I had no advanced knowledge or notice when they did that.
Okay, 2 quick questions for you on the future. You want to be the top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee next year?
Well, I think that certainly my work on the Intelligence Committee is about national security and focusing on national security, and that's going to continue to be my focus.
Give us a sense then of what you would investigate if you were head of the Intelligence Committee and Republicans take control of the House.
You know, as I said from the beginning, is what I think we want Attorney General Garland to be focusing on instead of Mar-a-Lago is Chinese espionage, certainly furthering how do we assist Ukraine in fighting Russia aggression, looking at ways that we look at what's going on at the border with human and drug smuggling and how it's affecting our families. And of course, there's always the issue of the spiraling crime that's occurring in our cities, and how can we impact that? How can we ensure that we have the right tools and information about any foreign influence that might be impacting that?
And as a Republican in Ohio, what does J.D. Vance, who in some polls is trailing right now, have to do to win that Senate race and hold the seat for Republicans?
Yeah, he has to make the case, and I think he's doing that. He's campaigning very hard, and you should have him on.
We'd love to. In fact, we've asked, and so far we haven't heard back. But if he's listening, J.D. Vance, we'd love to have you. Mike Turner, we loved having you. We'll see you soon here in Washington, and we'll be back in a moment.
Looks like I went too far. Let me back up a little bit here.
In terms of the number.
Let me back on up. Went too far. Sorry about that.
The plea bargain seems abundantly clear. He is testifying against entities, not people.
And there's been so much focus in the past 2 weeks on the Mar-a-Lago operation, this Weisselberg guilty plea this past week, but I know you believe that it's what's going down in Georgia that is potentially most legally risky for the former president, correct?
There is no doubt in my mind that the most risk to the former president is, in fact, the Georgia investigation. And one of the reasons I say that is because it has intensified in terms of the number of witnesses that the district attorney is calling before this special investigative grand jury, but also the fact that should not be overlooked is that Donald Trump has hired one of the best criminal defense lawyers in the country in the person of Drew Findling. Drew Findling was a past president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. He is based in Atlanta. He knows how to work within the system ethically and properly, and he's fierce. So when we look at this particular situation, Rudy Giuliani called to testify last week. We have no idea, nor should we have any idea in a secret proceeding what he said, or if he took the Fifth Amendment at any point in time. This week, Lindsey Graham is set to testify on Tuesday unless the 11th Circuit issues a stay and buys into his argument that his phone calls involving this election in 2020 and the results, when he wanted allegedly to say that they should look into the mail-in ballots, and perhaps there were many of the mail-in ballots that had faulty signatures, and his communications with Donald Trump would be the focus of this particular special grand jury. And that he wants to say, well, no, that was within my duties within the speech and debate clause. We're going to see what the 11th Circuit has to say about that. But I expect Lindsey Graham is going to have to testify. This grand jury is investigative only. They can issue a report that would tell the district attorney at a later point in time whether or not she does have reason to indict, probable cause to indict, any of the players, including Donald Trump.
And David Laufman, in terms of the operation of Mar-a-Lago, at this point, how concerned should any current or former staff of the former president there be concerned about legal exposure?
Well, I think any individuals who were involved in removing classified information from the White House in the waning moments of the Trump administration, taking them to Mar-a-Lago, knowingly keeping them there in a place they're not authorized to be, has potential criminal jeopardy, depending on all the facts and circumstances that the investigation uncovers. One of the statutes referenced in the search warrant is the Espionage Act, and at issue in principle is a provision that makes it a crime to willfully retain national defense information. And the fact that these were highly classified documents, as high as top secret code word, makes it pretty clear to me the president has potential jeopardy here, compounded by what appeared to be deliberate misrepresentations by the president or his team to the government about whether classified information remained at Mar-a-Lago, and hence the obstruction statute referenced in the search warrant.
Ricky, you've been at this for a long time, tracking legal cases of all sorts all across the country. Have you ever seen anyone facing more than a dozen legal, civil, congressional investigations at one time? And what is it like being an attorney for someone like that when they have competing, compounding legal concerns and interests?
I have never seen this many investigations happening all at the same time, some in greater stages, some in lesser stages. But if you are an attorney for Donald Trump, you are well advised to separate each one and decide where you're going to devote your energies. Donald Trump, it appears, has been hiring lawyers from different places, so one lawyer does not have all of the responsibility. But this is not a good time for Donald Trump, at least if he thinks that everything is coming in upon him. However, we also know that Donald Trump enjoys the chaos, and we will see what happens in terms of his decision if he is going to run or not in 2024.
We sure will. Ricky Kleeman, CBS News legal analyst, David Laufman, former Justice Department official, thank you both for being here, and we'll be right back.
There's a surprising reason why we're all paying more at the grocery store.
Who's the first person? It ain't chaos, it's anarchy. This is unlike anything I've ever seen.
For 24 hours.
We want to turn now to Campaign 22. Our Robert Costa is on the campaign trail in Atlanta this morning, and the editor-in-chief, the Cook.
I don't care nothing about that. Let's see what other headline we may have before we turn off on this. Looks like the same old 6 and 7. Marshall ought to be winding this thing up. Right about there.
That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Margaret will be back next Sunday. For Margaret and all the hardworking folks at Face the Nation, I'm Ed O'Keefe.
Hope her child gets well. You could tell by looking at her, she was beat. Probably been up all night. She wasn't all dutied up in the studio like she usually is. Thanks again for looking and watching, being concerned as a concerned citizen. Good luck to each and every one of us. God bless America. God bless America's endeavors. And as we always end by saying shalom. May peace be with you, and may heaven help us all. God bless.